on the last, I guess, really full day of COP. So appreciate you all joining for this session where we'll talk about why addressing plastic and plastic waste. Three speakers to discuss, again, this Kaushik Chandrashar, who is a waste management India country office of the United Nations Environment. We will also hear from Dr. Build the Circular Economy with creation of interactive web application urban litter. And then you also worked as a solid waste within the Department of Public Works. Research, explored environmental and a master's in anthropology from Purdue. And then we are joined in person today. He will continue to work on federal institutional racism. There, he focused on domestic loss and damage and clerked for the environment, ranging from the Gulf South to that I've pulled out. I know where all times people don't understand. So between as much oil to make plastic as we do for more per person than we use, fossil fuel industry is investing a lot of resources. So what we've seen from the international spaces that I work around methane emissions, which are important, but I think that the plastic often falls below in the waste management side. So I think it's the chemical industry, the social and health impacts of plastic production. So Russell, this week we have seen you advocating for fossil fuel drawdown, talking about the impacts of oil production and consumption. A lot of the times this is framed in energy, right? We're talking about energy use, about how you've been engaging with the US international climate community to shed light on these connections and what you are seeing or what you're not seeing around ending.
Great. So thank you for that, Amy. We've been here both as the Hip Hop Caucus and as the Climate Action Network, really focusing on not just phase down, but phase out of fossil fuels. Right now, the People's Plenary is still going on, where hundreds of people are in solidarity focused on that, ending production of plastics, petrochemicals, and that's the feedstock really that creates the plastics across the world that's generating these issues where, everyone has a credit card's worth of plastics in their blood. We've seen plastic show up in people's placentas, something that we need to eliminate, particularly as the statistics you just mentioned. One other additional one is that right now we're doing a phase down and phase out of coal as their last lifeline is going to end up putting us on the same trajectory towards 1.5 by keeping us all hooked on plastic and plastic production. Plastics are particularly produced in parts of the United States that are already privy to. We see a lot of plastic production and overwhelming amounts of foreign companies that are coming in and taking over, have higher asthma rates, et cetera. And now that they're being subjected to further pollution, hazardous risks, and it's connecting to things like vinyl chloride that are being overly produced. And so people really just got an understanding of that after the East Palestine disaster and seeing the amount of pollution that came from burning of these plastic byproduct materials that end up poisoning. Solidarity from the Gulf South to the Global South to make sure that we're ending this plastic pollution crisis.
Yes, I love that. From the Gulf sites and plastic gyres in the ocean, but the production side of things is also just as critical to address. And as I was mentioning about methane emissions are from the energy sector, and that is also going towards, again, producing plastics. So thank you. I think we'll have time for more to who's working with UNEP. So Kaushik, in working with UNEP specifically on plastic and marine litter, we would love to hear from you on UNEP's take on how to tackle the plastic waste crisis and the importance of closing that tap on especially these hard to recycle plastics and packaging.
Great. So thank you, Amy. Thank you for the opportunity. I take care of the marine is serious and rather concerning. Globally, we kind of consume about 430 million tons of plastics. We're looking at the amount being recycled. Many of the solutions are giving rise to newer issues like micro and nanoplastics as well. The production levels, as far as plastics are concerned, are looking at tripling by about 2060. We've had multiple research reports linking plastics to climate, showing that there is an intrinsic connect between them. I mean, we know the numbers. I think it's for us to identify these linkages, to identify very specific active in solving these issues. It is propagated a systems approach for solving this plastic issue. The emphasis on plastic use using three diversify. Now, you'll find these concepts emphasized multiple times in the zero draft of the global treaty. Suitable products. Now, this aspect here, reduce the throwaway economy. This, has established almost an opportunity for us to reduce, to promote circularity irrespective of the material being utilized. For, for instance, if I'm looking at an alternative to SUP or single-use plastics, my focus would be to reuse, repair, and reuse as many times. And this would help in minimizing the virgin intake of material to shun the habit of single use, irrespective of which commodity is being used. That said, there is no ambiguity that they step further in reducing the hard to recycle plastics. There has been a single use plastic ban. The government has identified. Now, we've been supporting the government here to prepare life cycle assessments for the alternatives for each of these single use. This is very, very significant because most of the LCA reports for alternatives that you find today are based on global data and are not very India specific. So our work will be very, very important for the policymakers to take an informed decision on the way to go, on building capacities for identifying different resins, for identifying what is banned and what is not. Also involved at the country level in supporting the implementation of extended producers' responsibility. Plastic ban, which targets single-use plastics, and an EPR, which targets packaging plastics. So there have been very specific mandates as far as take back, recycling, and reuse targets are concerned for produce implementation happens at the ground level. Just to give you working on is for commodities like detergent powders, for cooking oil, milk, water. We're trying to put up monetize plastic waste collection for the municipalities or the urban local bodies, which would have otherwise been just a mandate under the rules, right? So the urban also setting up collection processes for low value plastics. And by low value plastics, I mean multi-layers would have never happened because low value plastic at the dump sites, they end up getting littered. So this is being collected with the help of industry by handing out incentives like daily commodities, milk, bread, eggs in exchange of a certain quantity. So I'll maybe stop here and
touch on a really good point too about collection, and maybe in the discussion we can talk about some of the challenges with collection. And as I understand it, India's solid waste management rules do require waste and going straight to dump sites. So maybe something that we can. But next we'll turn to Gideon. So much of your work has focused on that human aspect of waste generation and disposal, drawing heavily on that archaeological and garbologist training. Could you share more about those impacts of plastics that we see in marine environments and what methods you use to engage the public? Yes.
All right. Yep. So my name is Dr. Gideon Singer. I'm Caucasian. My preferred pronouns are he, him, and his. And today I'm wearing a blue button-up shirt. As Amy mentioned, I self-identify as a digital garbologist. And we have in shaping all types of waste. And today I'll focus a little bit more specifically on plastic pollution. I think plastic pollution issue, but I want to talk to you all about it from a specific lens, which is digital garbology. And so what is digital garbology? I think I have to describe that before I can talk about the different research questions and methods and to think about the plastic pollution issue and what they can do about it. So garbology comes from archaeology and ethnography or cultural anthropology. In terms of tools, what was really novel about it was in the 1970s and onward, a lot of traditional and classically trained archaeologists came together and said, we know we have all of these methods and tools and frameworks for understanding society through the artifacts in the last 50 years, 100 years, thousands of years, and so on. And they've really inverted that lens on our society in the United States. A lot of the garbological work on, early waste sorting methodologies and waste audits, going to landfills and taking an auger to get a core sample. These are archaeological methods combined with surveying and other qualitative methodologies to triangulate things that people were trying to figure out about. And so my work builds upon this tradition of garbology and sort of in two main ways that make it digital. The first way that makes it digital is, doing garbology in the 21st century means a lot of the plastics pollution here, but the quantity aspect of digital garbology that makes it digital, which I think is, maybe harder to grasp at first, is the the potential garbage and waste and emissions associated with using anything digital. And so, using digital methods, for example, which is geographic information systems, and I'll talk about that a little bit more soon, has a digital garbology technology or new apps or new devices without thinking about uh, the damage that could be caused and environmental damage sense. All of the means to dam any of those things is just to acknowledge you know, the critical and reflexive role mitigated and so on. And so that's where I'm coming from as a archaeologist who got into garbology, who is now doing digital garbology. But what does that mean? What am I actually doing? And so, as I alluded to, a lot of my work draws upon ethnographic methods, um, a lot of archaeological methods, so mapping out field sites, recording artifacts, in this case plastics, and other types of litter, and then using geospatial methods such as mapping and field data collection and all of that to start piecing together um, ask questions about litter hotspots. So where does litter accumulate and how do litter hotspots relate to other points of interest with the spatial relationship between plastics and plastic pollution with these other points of interest is really important to making decisions about, um, you know, how to ban plastic, who use questions about how litter and plastic pollution change during different times of day, maybe different times of week, um, maybe during different special events and seasons or holidays. Um, we can ask questions about the strategies that are deployed to prevent or manage and abate litter. And so using data-driven approaches to understand, whether a plastic bag ban that's been implemented is effective or not, and how to make it more effective, um, whether your street sweeping programs are a technology to upgrade your waste bin so that they have sensors and compactors and all of that in them. Um, and maybe that we'll come to this in the discussion later about the role of technology, but simply putting a technologically superior waste bin on the streets isn't necessarily going to be the best strategy to manage or abate litter. And you can use garbological research to really hone in on that. And then lastly, I think the questions that are really interesting are how access to the potential benefits and harms associated with the recovery of resources from the plastics life cycle is distributed amongst different groups. And so that gets to some of the points about you know um, Cancer Alley, the Ohio River Alley, and really just living near any landfill or waste processing center all over the world, there are going to be disproportionate dwell on the harms. But there are important capacities that living and having the ability to thrift and make money off of waste presents opportunities for people who otherwise might not have those opportunities. It's like that. And so that's part of the holistic anthropological approach. And so, I'm happy to programs and things like that, but the reason is to map and manage litter that are data driven using timely data streams. And I'll leave it at that.
And just tying it here to COP. So last year, if you were at COP in Sharm in Egypt, you probably noticed that the waste bin situation, other times you look inside and you see commingled waste because it was not properly sorted. And I think engaging the public on this, and then as Gideon's talking about, oftentimes who is responsible for this litter, right? So yes, to some degree, we are throwing things in the wrong bin, or we end up littering, which is where we're getting into with extended producer responsibility and being able to acknowledge that these producers of the plastics are the one that need to bear the brunt of the management. So I would be curious to hear about how we engage the public without putting all of the responsibility on the public to make them feel like
Happy to start. So, I mean, the problem with the environment is always like thought of as a problem of the commons, and like particularly comes up when you think about 50 to 75 years. And so engaging the public on it is a strategy that's important, but every ocean of us moving on from plastics. One interesting point that I heard when I was at a sustainability forum here at COP was it was a new technological thing, but sometimes innovate just means to change. And by changing, it means that we can revert back to smarter ways. And sometimes smarter ways are the older ways. To completely wean ourselves off of them, but there's significant clearly that's harming us. Whether it's from focusing on policy solutions that eliminate single-use plastics, like as we were just talking about. In the U.S., there are legislation that does that, whether it's the Foam Act that was recently introduced in Congress. There's also focus on getting rid of ending the transport of petrochemicals and LNG by rail, which is now being paused until 2025. That is a policy solution that legislates to this, to creating plastics and to using petrochemicals, because it becomes, frankly, from a market-based standpoint, too expensive to litigate, too expensive to deal with being sued for the adverse health impacts, too expensive to simply like produce and transport for them to continue producing. Particularly at Hip Hop Caucus, think about that, is that we try to utilize storytelling as a way to get individuals into the process so that they can see themselves that keep popping up across the country. And usually we end up like you've seen the videos on film where it's like we're just giving out masses of bottled use plastics. And then also simultaneously, how can we wean and help clean up the water systems in these parts of the country and others? And so making sure that water systems are actually functioning. And of course, like people think about this as just an issue in the developing world, but it's absolutely an issue even in parts of the United States, whether it's Jackson, Mississippi, parts of Alabama. You see sewer treatment issues, even in Flint, Michigan, and New Jersey as well. It's flooded with chemicals and petrochemical waste. And therefore, there was a run on all of the grocery stores across, cutting off the product availability and giving people alternative solutions and educating them on that is the best way.
It's interrelated. We can have water day, we can have health day, we hopefully will have a waste day, but the reality is these are all connected and need to be discussed as such. Of that, but it's not regulated, right? We don't actually know sometimes what is in bottled water. Also leaches microplastics into the water, especially so many glorious ads of bottled water. Fiji water, right? The ad has a beautiful waterfall that looks amazing. When you hear about that are safe to drink, but it is the scares when that makes the news, that is what people think of with tap water. And so going in and actually, again, education. So yeah, I'll turn back online to see Kaushik if you'd like to talk more about engaging the public on some of the solutions in India and even.
What is very, very important is having a continuous communication, right? So having a regular exchange. Segregation, like you mentioned, has been one of the major issues right from the early 2000s. No, rules, there have been multiple rules that have been brought into us. You would find India is such a vast nation, and you'd find the best practices here, and you'll also find the worst right here. So this getting people on the same platform, having best practices exchanged between the subnational levels, getting the states together, getting the cities to the cities and the city administration, because Startup India is something that has offered some wonderful solutions as far as a platform for innovators to kind of bridge with policymakers, decision makers at the government level, so that they're able to use standardization as far as plastic packaging is concerned for most of the commodities, especially the fast-moving commodity. Commodity comes of, it takes various shapes. You talk about different sizes. It could be, given to you in a bottle. It could be given to you. It becomes very difficult for a typical recycling system to kind of handle all of this together. So I think standardization of packaging is and in terms of creating infrastructure that can accept more quantities of plastic waste, and are very, very skilled in terms of waste segregation. It's up to the cities to kind of integrate these workers into the formal system and utilize their services. In parallel, also providing them with a livelihood and the concept of just transition, as it features in the zero draft. So there's been a lot of discussion around alternatives have been making a lot of noise in India, especially at the city level. Now it is for us to understand that the conditions, and until we are having infrastructure to handle this kind of waste, we shouldn't be kind of pushing for compostables and biodegradables. I'd not be able to differentiate between the conventional plastic and the bioplastics which are entering the market.
And other things that are marketed as compostable, it's not a great solution if there's not a composting bin to throw them into and a hauler, and continue to encourage the public to engage. It can be digitally with citizen science or engaging in your field methods.
Is really important, but and there are different ways to do it. And one of the ways that we, for example, can sometimes be very dry and difficult to interpret data sets or numbers. Needs to present that narrative alongside the story of an informal waste picker, some of the quantitative and qualitative aspects of this issue. And so, in the spirit of triangulation, one of the things that I think is most important to engage the public around is this notion of bans, because your original question directly makes the public responsible. Soft plastics in your business, your small local business, or your buying up all the water bottles anywhere. There needs to be a level of empathy and sort of a focus on equity with engaging the public around bans or around when we're not going to use a particular. There was a national television computer recycling scheme. It was a great piece of DPR legislation, electronics from going to landfill, what it meant to effectively ban those things from going to landfill, and how to provide the hardest place to recycle electronic waste in Australia, and thought about, well, what about the importance of them all away all at once? Or if you think about a plastic bag ban, having this massive stockpile of plastic bags, because you have all these local businesses that probably buy them in bulk, and figuring out the solution to what to do with them. It can get really tricky, and so I'm not by any means saying that bans are bad. I'm just saying that they are really completely responsible for paying for that ban, whether it's having these massive stockpiles and not having a buyback program. That rounds out your original question. I'll leave it there.
It does. Thanks, Gideon. I think that also brings it back to really, as much as that would be ideal, alerts, and we have to use plastic water bottles or any other water that's in a cardboard box. All of those materials should be standardized so that it's mindful of everyone's time. I do want to touch a little bit about the COP process and the UN Plastics Treaty negotiations. So these are obviously two international negotiation spaces where COP is focused on climate primarily. The UN Plastic Treaty, as the name suggests, is negotiating for a legally binding treaty on plastic pollution. So it's not against plastic in particular, it's how to find those upstream and downstream solutions to plastic pollution. So I'm interested to hear the panel's thoughts maybe on the connections or the misfires that you're seeing between how do we see that the implications of that treaty are also relevant to the COP audience. Maybe I'll start with you in the room.
Although both part of the UN Environmental Program versus the UNFCCC. And so from a logistically, like when people want to be able to and that's just a capacity issue. We saw that in Uruguay when it's like the waste pickers and we're mobilizing together and trying to bring together which was kind of preventing us from getting past a real zero draft. And so hopefully there'll be progress in the next round of the plastic treaty in 1.3 when we're in Canada next year. But when fossil fuel interests are basically outnumbering or outgunning process, and of course we've seen the same thing here at COP, for a number of years now, where it's like the fossil fuel industry is outnumbering in issues, but it is an ongoing issue. And in terms of getting to solutions for this crisis, I think the organizations that are trying to is for people to be able to engage in that process.
Yes, thank you for saying that. And it's definitely been interesting to see the number of fossil fuel interests at this COP, even compared to last year, which seemed like a lot. We are absolutely more at this COP. So Kaushik or Gideon, any thoughts on?
With more research studies, establishing this link between plastics and climate, I think we should stop looking at, both of them in silos. Like I mentioned earlier, it's time that we acknowledge that there is this link, and for arriving with, geography-wise, material-wise, as well as product-wise data. I think so that we are able to arrive at a common understanding. We have different countries negotiating at different levels. I think there is a need to arrive at that common understanding. And of course, once this is made, we have platforms like the UNIA and INC that are bringing stakeholders together, and of course, arriving at a treaty, at a binding treaty. Yes.
Yeah, we need more data, but B, we also have to be very careful about the ownership of data as it relates to plastics. The plastics pollution, very disparate geographies, disparate social scenario, different environmental scenario, but making sure that if we collect data in those different contexts, plastics pollution, but it's really important that it's great if you can make your data open, but accessibility and availability aren't the same thing. So if your data is open and it's available and nobody can make sense of it, or the right people who need fossil fuels want to help fund that research, we have to be very careful about the role that they have in being data stewards and whether they concerns there that I've had to deal with throughout my career. Because believe it or not, a lot of the plastics pollution projects I've worked on have come from different diverse funding streams, and some of them very much with their own interests, whether they're do that. But it's our job to, at both COP and both in the plastics treaty, and it's truly accessible.
Thanks, Gideon. Since we are basically at time, I did want to see if anyone in the room had questions before we go to final thoughts. In the audience for sticking it out on the last afternoon of the last day of COP. I do want to allow our speakers just 1 minute final reflection call.
I think the time is now that we act as far as all the stakeholders are concerned, right from the citizen to the final policymaker. There are options which are available to take this and work on it. The best practices are there, and there are organizations.
Yeah, thank you, Kaushik. And Gideon?
Yeah, I agree. And so many people are doing it now already. And one of the things that has stuck with me in this session, as a trained archaeologist, I couldn't agree more. And also the notion that the best practice understand what makes the best and what makes the worst, and how we can avoid doing things that are hurting ourselves now. And so how we talk about and think about and facilitate these dialogues is going to be key moving forward. And thanks for organizing this.
False solutions as they are, and make sure that we're looking to the folks who are living this on the ground, who are closest to it, for solutions. And this is what I would call on in terms of us stopping petrochemicals, and that'll help us stop the plastic crisis so that 50 years from now, we're not having the same conversation.
Between now and next November, when we talk about addressing methane mitigation in the waste sector, if we focus on the plastic pollution and the plastic waste that we have now. So these two are very much linked and should be part of the conversation as we talk about solid waste methane here.